what you feel you are is not going to be a useful identity if it's not integrated with other people.
Well, we have to acknowledge that aside from being unethical and confusing, it's extremely dangerous. The parents of these young people who have fallen into, I'm going to say, this darkness and this confusion. These parents are traumatized.
People don't really understand what an identity does. And we have lapsed into this idiot subjectivity that's predicated on the assumption that you are whatever you feel. What you feel you are is not going to be a useful identity if it's not integrated with other people. Identity itself is socially negotiated, which the lefties should know because they're all bang on about constructivism constantly. And so the idea that identity is only subjective and that it's only defined by what you feel is unethical. That's an unethical stance for clinicians to adopt, but it's also completely impractical because your identity is the game you play with your intimate partner.
Well, we have to acknowledge that aside from being unethical and confusing, it's extremely dangerous because it puts...
Yes.
I mean, we have to always keep that in front of us. You know, I spend a lot of time talking with families, parents, kids. I want to speak about a different population, and that is the parents of these young people who have fallen into, I'm going to say, this darkness and this confusion. These parents are traumatized. You know, there are these private Facebook groups and other groups that parents attend, and they generally are anonymous and they have to be vetted. And you know, there's this huge process that they have to go through that takes weeks and weeks in order to get the support that they need, because our profession is demonizing them. I am so troubled by how these parents have been treated and are being treated by the mental health profession, by the medical profession. We have to talk about the kids, but we have to talk about the parents and what all this is doing to families. It's a destabilizing, destructive event in the family. It's an ordeal that they'll have to go through for years and years. You know, I was looking at my screen, you know, at the grid of all the parents that were listening in. And I said to them that as a psychiatrist, I am acknowledging the ordeal, the terrible ordeal they're going through, and that they have experienced and are experiencing trauma. You know, when you learn that your daughter is scheduled to have a mastectomy, when you learn that your son is having genital surgery and their kids are going to be sterilized and you're not going to have grandchildren. These things are traumatic and they are losses. Everyone is being led to believe that there's a consensus on this issue of how do we take care of these kids. There is no consensus. There is an all-out war going on a professional level that no one is hearing about because it's not being covered outside of people like yourself and other, you know, conservative media, is covering the fact that there is an international debate going on and that there are countries who have made a 180, the most liberal LGBT-friendly countries such as Finland and Sweden and England, as you know, have made a 180 in this direction. And so that a child living in Stockholm or Oslo is not going to be able to get those puberty blockers and that testosterone without, in general, cannot get them if they are entered into, in a very rare instance.
This advice for parents Is this in your 2009 book, You're Teaching My Child What, or in your new book, Lost in Transnation?
In 2009, I thought that when I described what kids were being taught in sex education using our tax dollars, that they were being taught all this rubbish about gender and, born in the wrong body. And, it's a matter of, it's oppressive to be taught that we are all either male or female. I thought that when I demonstrated that kids were being taught that, there would be, a huge reaction. Sadly, that did not happen. And this huge reaction is only taking place many years later when we are being faced with this terrible crisis. Everyone is terribly concerned about the suicide rate among kids who are questioning or confused about their gender identity. I'm talking about parents who have gone through the most terrible things in their lives. So you have to understand that even parents who went through divorces or cancer or 9/11 or what have you, terrible things, and they were able to go through those things without psychiatric help, without medication. Very rare babies that are born with ambiguous genitalia, and those ambiguous genitalia are due to some congenital issue, either endocrinological or due to chromosomal abnormality. And the baby is born, they take a look at the genitals, it's just not clear what's going on. And that's where the term comes from. This is important. And these were the cases that John Money became an expert in. When you look at John Money and his early life, and he wrote about this, he was very open about it. He grew up under the hand of an abusive, alcoholic, out of control father. He wrote later on in one of his books that he realized that the world might be better off if not only animals, but men were gelded at birth. I have a book that was published in 1998. Obviously a book for young people. And the entire premise of this book is that the gender binary is false, that we do not all fit into this category of male and female. And they're not talking about hermaphrodites or intersex, okay?
Part of the reason the psychiatric and psychological professions, the medical professions, did tilt in this gender-affirming direction was because Money's research was taken as gold standard. By your testimony as well, all of this started to become pretty public knowledge by about the year 2000, that the Money experiment had actually gone cataclysmically wrong. And yet what we've seen on the psychological, psychiatric, and counseling front, medical as well, is a doubling down
Correct.
of the insistence that gender is nothing but something that's socialized.
Correct. By 1998, kids were being told, no, that's an oppressive false binary. It's all on a spectrum. It's all fluid. And it's fluid for your entire life. Well, the thing is, kids are being led to believe, and parents are being led to believe, that you can step in with these very powerful medications, these hormones, and you can deny biology. So this is what parents don't know, that they must understand. And they have to understand this before their kid comes home and says, Mom, I'm not your daughter, I'm your son. They need to know this way before that happens.
The way that the legacy media and the left-wing activists react to a conversation such as ours is to point out that we're scaremongering and that this doesn't really pose a threat to, let's say, the vast majority of people, and it's of much more help to the small minority. Why do you think it's necessary for all parents to be, aware of what's going on in the schools?
Just 10 years ago, we had rates of, 1 in 10 to 30 to 100,000 people with this particular disorder. We didn't even have numbers. It was so rare let's say 20 years ago, it was so rare for a teenager to present as opposed to a little kid or an older person. It was so rare even they were rare, but it was even more rare for an adolescent to suddenly come out with this new identity and with gender dysphoria.